Picture this, a darkened room in rural Texas, 1944. Rows of wooden benches packed with German soldiers. Young men who crossed an ocean to fight for the Third Reich, now prisoners of war on American soil. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Then, silence falls. A projector hums to life. Light flickers across a makeshift screen. And suddenly, these men trained from childhood to hate America, indoctrinated to believe Americans were subhuman degenerates, find themselves watching something impossible. A Hollywood musical. Bright colors, dancing, laughter, freedom. Some sit frozen, jaws clenched. Others lean forward, confused. A few whisper nervously to their neighbors. One young soldier grips the bench beneath him so hard his knuckles turn white. Because this isn't torture. This isn't the brutal punishment they were promised would come. This is something far more dangerous to everything they believe. This is kindness. And kindness, when you've been taught to expect cruelty, can shatter a mind faster than any bullet. This was the most powerful psychological weapon of World War II. No explosions, no bloodshed, just light, sound, and story. The American government had discovered something the Nazis never anticipated. You don't defeat an ideology with force alone. Sometimes you simply show it the truth. But inside those camps, behind the laughter and the flickering images, another war was quietly unfolding. A war Germans fought against each other. A war between those who began to see the light and those who would kill to keep the darkness alive. This is not a story about entertainment. This is not about comfort or charity. This is a story about how America weaponized culture itself, how movies became bullets, how reality became the ultimate form of psychological warfare, and how thousands of German prisoners of war found themselves caught between two worlds, fighting a battle inside their own minds that would prove more brutal than anything they faced on the battlefield. We're going to follow one soldier's journey through three wars. The war between Nazi ideology and American culture, the war between propaganda and lived reality, and the war inside the camp itself, where Germans turned on Germans, and the price of changing your mind could be your life. The story begins not with capture, but with expectation. For years, German soldiers had been fed a steady diet of propaganda about America. In schoolrooms across the Third Reich, children learned that Americans were mongrels, a mixed-race nation of criminals and weaklings. They were told American soldiers couldn't fight, that American society was decadent and collapsing, that capture by American forces meant torture, starvation, degradation. The propaganda films showed Americans as savage, primitive, driven by base instincts and racial chaos. So imagine what runs through a German soldier's mind as he surrenders in North Africa, or France, or Italy. He's been defeated, yes, but he believes he's about to enter hell. He expects beatings, deprivation, perhaps execution. He clutches his remaining possessions and prepares for the worst moments of his life. Then he arrives at an American POW camp. The gates open, he steps through, and everything he's been told begins to crack. The camp is orderly, clean. There are barracks with real beds, not dirt floors. There's a mess hall serving hot food. There's a recreation yard with volleyball nets and soccer goals. There are libraries, medical facilities, and most impossibly, there's a schedule posted on the wall that lists something called movie night. One young soldier, we'll call him Johann, steps off the transport truck in Louisiana in the summer of 1943. He's 19 years old. He joined the Hitler Youth at 10. He's never known in Germany without the Nazis. He's fought in North Africa, watched his friends die in the desert, and fully expected to die himself. Instead, he's standing in what looks less like a prison and more like a military base. An American guard hands him a blanket, a bar of soap, and a mimeographed welcome sheet that includes mealtimes and recreational activities. Johann looks around. Other prisoners are playing cards at wooden tables. Some are reading. Two men kick a soccer ball back and forth. There are no chains, no beatings, no torture chambers, just ordinary life continuing in the most extraordinary circumstances. His mind cannot reconcile this. He was promised barbarity. He's been given civility. And that dissonance creates a kind of psychological vertigo. He feels unmoored, suspicious. This must be a trick. This kindness must be the prelude to something worse. No enemy behaves this way, especially not the subhuman Americans he's been taught to despise.
That night, he lies in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Around him, other prisoners whisper in the darkness. Some talk about escape, though they're thousands of miles from Germany with nowhere to run. Others talk about the war, debating whether the Wehrmacht can still win. A few talk about home, about wives and mothers and the lives they left behind. But Johann stays silent, because he's trying to understand something that doesn't fit into any framework he's been given. The Americans are treating them like human beings, and that simple fact threatens to unravel everything. 3 days later comes the first movie night. The prisoners are herded into a large wooden building that serves as the camp theater. Johann shuffles in with the others, still wary, still waiting for the trap to spring. They take their seats on hard benches. The room smells of sawdust and sweat. An American officer stands at the front and explains in accented German that they'll be watching an American film. Entertainment, he says, a small comfort during difficult times. The lights go down, the projector starts its rhythmic clicking, and then the screen fills with light. What plays is a musical, bright, colorful, exuberant. Johann has never seen anything like it. In Germany, films were propaganda or melodrama, heavy with meaning and message. But this is pure spectacle. People dancing across elaborate sets, women in sequined dresses, men in sharp suits, jazz music that pulses with life and energy. The camera moves in ways he's never seen, swooping and gliding. The editing is fast, dynamic, sophisticated. And something happens that Johann doesn't expect. Somewhere in the third row, someone laughs. It's a small sound, quickly stifled, but it's there. A German soldier, a prisoner of war, laughing at an American joke. Others shift uncomfortably in their seats. A few turn to see who broke the silence. But the movie continues, and slowly, incrementally, more sounds emerge from the darkness. Chuckles, quiet gasps of amazement at a particularly impressive dance sequence, even applause when the film ends. Johann doesn't laugh. He can't, because he understands on some deep instinctive level that something dangerous just happened, that this wasn't just entertainment. This was an attack, not on his body, but on his beliefs, and he has no defense against it. As the prisoners file out, he hears fragments of conversation. Some men are angry, calling the film decadent propaganda. Others are thoughtful, processing what they saw. A few are excited, asking when the next showing will be. And Johann realizes that the camp has just been divided, invisibly, into those who will resist this cultural assault and those who will succumb to it. He doesn't know it yet, but he's just witnessed the opening shot of a war far more complex than anything he faced in North Africa. What Johann and his fellow prisoners don't understand is that none of this is accidental. The movie nights, the comfortable conditions, the relative freedom, all of it is part of a carefully designed program. The Americans call it re-education, but it's really psychological warfare, refined to a razor's edge. In Washington, military planners and intelligence officers have come to a realization. Defeating Germany on the battlefield is one thing, but defeating Nazism as an ideology is something else entirely. You can't kill an idea with bombs. You can't destroy a belief system with bullets. If America wants to ensure that Germany never rises again as a fascist threat, they need to change how Germans think. And the best time to do that is when you have thousands of them captive, isolated from Nazi propaganda, and vulnerable to new ideas. So they design a program. Every POW camp in America becomes a laboratory for cultural transformation. The films are chosen deliberately. American musicals that showcase diversity and freedom. Comedies that humanize Americans and undermine notions of racial superiority. Newsreels showing Allied unity and the strength of democratic societies. War documentaries that demonstrate America's vast industrial power and make continued German resistance seem futile. Each film is a weapon. Each screening is a battle. The guards watch carefully. They note which prisoners laugh, which ones scowl, which ones seem thoughtful afterward. They identify the hardcore Nazis and separate them when possible. They encourage the moderates, the doubters, the ones starting to question. They create opportunities for prisoners to engage with American culture beyond just films. English classes, American history lectures, access to uncensored newspapers and magazines.
Johann attends every screening, not because he wants to, but because attendance is strongly encouraged, and the alternative is sitting alone in the barracks. Over weeks and months, he watches dozens of films. At first, he maintains his skepticism. He tells himself this is all manipulation, that the Americans are just better at propaganda than the Germans. He focuses on finding flaws, inconsistencies, proof that the images on screen are lies. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something changes. He watches a film about American family life. Simple, domestic, boring on the surface. But what strikes him is the freedom. Children talking back to parents without fear. Women making decisions, neighbors of different backgrounds sharing a street. In Germany, life was structured, hierarchical, controlled. Every aspect of existence was organized by the state. But here, in this film, life seems loose, chaotic even, but also vibrant, alive in a way Germany never was. He watches a newsreel showing American factories producing tanks, planes, ships. The scale is staggering. Row after row of assembly lines, thousands of workers, production numbers that dwarf anything Germany achieved. And Johann begins to understand something he never allowed himself to consider before. Germany was always going to lose this war. The numbers were never in their favor. The propaganda about German superiority was just that, propaganda. He watches a comedy where a black American and a white American work together, trade jokes, treat each other as equals. This violates everything Johann was taught about race. The Nazi doctrine was built on racial hierarchy, on the idea that Aryans were inherently superior and that racial mixing would destroy civilization. But here, on screen, is proof that America's diversity doesn't weaken it. If anything, it seems to make it stronger. These revelations don't come all at once. They arrive in small moments, tiny cracks in the armor of his ideology. A laugh that escapes before he can stop it, a moment of admiration for American technology, a flicker of doubt about something he always accepted as fact. Each crack is small, but together they begin to form a web of fractures across everything he believed. One evening, after a screening of a film about American democracy, Johann finds himself in the camp library. He's never been much of a reader, but something drives him there. He picks up an American newspaper, the New York Times. He reads an article about the war, written with a level of honesty and criticism that would be impossible in Germany. American journalists questioning their own government's decisions, politicians debating strategy openly, citizens protesting legally without fear of arrest. And Johann realizes he's been lied to his entire life. Not just about America, about everything. The nature of freedom, the purpose of government, the dignity of the individual. He's been told that democracy was weak, that freedom was chaos, that only strong authoritarian control could create a great nation. But America, for all its flaws and contradictions, has built something Germany never could. A society where people aren't just subjects, but citizens, where power is questioned, not worshipped. He sits in that library for hours, newspaper pages spread before him, and feels something inside him break. Not violently, not dramatically, but like ice cracking under the weight of spring. He doesn't cry. He doesn't have some great moment of enlightenment. He just sits there, feeling the foundation of his identity slowly dissolve. That night, back in his bunk, he whispers to the prisoner in the bed next to him, a man named Franz, captured at the same time from the same unit. They've known each other for years. "Franz," says Johann, quietly, "what if they lied to us? About all of it?" Franz is silent for a long moment. Then, barely audible, "I've been thinking the same thing." But not everyone in the camp is thinking the same thing. In another barracks, in another section of the camp, a different kind of prisoner watches the same films with very different eyes. His name is Otto, and he's a true believer. A sergeant in the Wehrmacht, a party member since before the war, a man who volunteered for the Eastern Front because he wanted to fight for the fatherland's destiny. Capture hasn't changed his convictions. If anything, it's hardened them. Otto watches the American films with disgust. He sees the diversity and calls it mongrelization. He sees the freedom and calls it degeneracy. He sees the industrial power and tells himself it's built on Jewish manipulation of finance. Every screening reinforces his hatred, his certainty that Germany is right and America is the enemy of everything good and pure.
And Otto is not alone. Throughout the camp, there are hundreds like him. Men who would rather die than abandon their beliefs. Men who see the re-education program for exactly what it is, an attempt to destroy their identity and replace it with American values. These men organize, quietly at first, then more openly. They form what they call the Camp Court, an unofficial hierarchy that mirrors the Nazi Party structure. They identify the weak ones, the doubters, the traitors. They pass judgment in whispered conversations, and they enforce their will through intimidation, violence, and murder. Johann doesn't know about the Camp Court at first. He's too focused on his own internal transformation, too absorbed in his questioning and doubt. But one morning, he wakes to find a message scratched into the wall above his bunk. Traitor. His blood runs cold. Someone has been watching him. Someone noticed him laughing at the films, reading American newspapers, asking questions. Someone has marked him. Franz sees the message too. We need to be careful. Otto and his people. They're watching everyone. Johann begins to notice things he missed before. How certain prisoners sit together in meals, separate from the others. How they speak only German, refusing to learn English. How they glare at anyone who seems too friendly with the American guards. How prisoners who express doubt about Germany's cause sometimes show up to breakfast with bruises, or don't show up at all. The camp, he realizes, has become two camps occupying the same space. One full of men slowly opening their eyes to a new reality, the other full of men determined to keep their eyes shut, no matter the cost. Movie night becomes a battleground. Otto and his followers sit in the back rows, arms crossed, faces set in permanent scowls. When someone laughs at an American joke, they take note. When someone applauds at the end of a film, they remember. After the screenings, in the barracks, they conduct their own meetings. They remind everyone of their oath to the Führer. They speak of honor and loyalty and the coming German victory. They identify those who waver and subject them to pressure. You laughed tonight, Otto tells one young prisoner, at enemy propaganda. That makes you a collaborator. The young man stammers, tries to explain. It was just a joke. I didn't mean. There are no jokes in war. Otto cuts him off. Only loyalty and betrayal. Which are you? The prisoner is beaten that night. Not severely enough to require medical attention, which would alert the Americans. Just enough to send a message. Just enough to ensure compliance. Johann watches this happen. Watches the young prisoner limp into breakfast the next morning, face bruised, spirit broken. And Johann understands that his own transformation puts him in danger. The more he doubts, the more he questions, the more he opens himself to American culture, the more he becomes a target. But here's the thing. He can't go back. He's seen too much, understood too much. The lies are too obvious now. He can't unknow what he's learned. He can't unsee what the films have shown him. He can't return to the comfortable certainty of his Nazi ideology any more than he could convince himself the sky is green. So Johann makes a choice. He starts being more careful. He doesn't laugh at the films anymore, or at least not visibly. He keeps his thoughts to himself. He nods along when Otto speaks. He pretends to be the loyal German soldier Otto wants him to be. But inside, the transformation continues. And he's not the only one. Throughout the camp, men are making similar calculations, hiding their doubt, concealing their changing beliefs, creating a secret network of those who are ready to leave the Nazi ideology behind, but aren't ready to die for that decision. The tension builds for months. Movie nights continue. The re-education program expands. More films, more classes, more exposure to American life. The moderates grow more confident. The true believers grow more desperate. Both sides understand that something has to break. And then, in the spring of 1945, news arrives that changes everything. Germany has surrendered. The war is over. The Nazis have lost. Hitler is dead. The Third Reich has collapsed. The Americans gather all the prisoners in the main yard and make the announcement. They show newsreels of the surrender, of Allied troops occupying Berlin, of the concentration camps being liberated. They show the full horror of what was done in Germany's name. For some prisoners, this is devastating, but not surprising. They've been preparing for this moment, watching the war turn, accepting the inevitable. For others, it's a complete shock. They refuse to believe it. They call it enemy propaganda. They insist the Führer has a secret weapon, a final strategy that Germany will still prevail.
Otto stands in that yard, fists clenched, rage burning in his eyes. Around him, prisoners weep or sit in stunned silence or begin to talk excitedly about going home, but Otto only feels betrayal. The Wehrmacht failed, the party failed, the Führer failed. Everything he believed in, everything he fought for, has been revealed as a lie. But he won't accept it, can't accept it, because accepting it means accepting that he was wrong, that he fought for evil, that the thousands of deaths he witnessed, the atrocities he may have participated in, were all for nothing. His entire identity is built on the righteousness of the Nazi cause. Without that, he is nothing, less than nothing. So Otto and his followers dig in. They become more brutal, more violent. They intensify their campaign against the traitors who are now openly embracing American culture. They conduct midnight tribunals in the barracks. They beat prisoners who talk about staying in America. They murder a man who volunteers to help on a local American farm. The camp erupts in violence, not between prisoners and guards, but between prisoners and prisoners. German against German, true believers against those ready to move on. The Americans tried to intervene, separating the hardcore Nazis into different sections, but the damage is done. The camp has become a microcosm of Germany itself, a nation at war with its own soul. Johann watches the murder happen, watches Otto and 3 others drag a man behind the barracks, hears the sounds of the beating, sees the body lying still in the morning light, and Johann understands that staying silent is no longer an option, that neutrality is impossible. He has to choose a side. That evening, there's another movie screening. The Americans are showing a Hollywood Western, cowboys and outlaws and frontier justice, simple entertainment after weeks of tension and violence. But Johann doesn't watch the film. He watches Otto. Otto sits rigid, radiating hatred. His followers flank him like guards. They scan the room for infractions, for signs of betrayal. They've become the camp Gestapo, enforcing ideological purity through fear. Johann stands up, walks down the aisle, sits directly in front of Otto and his men. And when the film reaches a funny moment, Johann laughs, loudly, deliberately, defiantly. The room goes quiet. Prisoners turn to look. They understand what's happening. Johann has just declared himself. He's chosen his side. Otto leans forward, whispers in Johann's ear, "You're a dead man." Johann doesn't turn around, doesn't flinch, just watches the screen and says, loud enough for others to hear, "No, I'm finally alive."
The violence that follows is inevitable. Otto and his men corner Johann that night, but they don't realize that Johann isn't alone anymore. Dozens of other prisoners, men who've also transformed, who've also chosen to leave the Nazi ideology behind, step out of the shadows. They surround Otto and his followers. "It's over," Franz says. "The war is over. Germany lost. The Nazis are finished. You can accept it or you can die holding on to a lie, but you can't terrorize us anymore." Otto spits at Franz's feet. "You're all traitors. You've all betrayed the fatherland." "No," Johann says quietly. "We've betrayed a criminal regime. There's a difference." The American guards arrive before blood is shed. They separate the groups. The hardcore Nazis are moved to a different section of the camp, isolated, surrounded by barbed wire and constant supervision. The moderates remain in the main camp where the re-education program continues. But the real transformation has already happened. Not because of the films exactly. The films were just the catalyst. The real transformation came from seeing an alternative to everything they'd been taught, from understanding that another way of life was possible, from recognizing that their choices were their own, not predetermined by ideology or authority. In the months that follow, as the war recedes into history and the occupation of Germany begins, the American camps become staging grounds for a different kind of soldier. Germans who want to help rebuild their country as a democracy. Germans who want to immigrate to America. Germans who understand that the Nazi ideology was a poison and that the only antidote is truth. Johann stays in America. He volunteers to work on farms while still a prisoner. He studies English. He reads voraciously, American history, philosophy, literature. He watches every film the Americans show, not as propaganda, but as windows into a culture he wants to understand. When he's finally released, he applies for immigration. 3 years later, he becomes an American citizen.
He never forgets what happened in that camp, never forgets the violence, the division, the war Germans fought against Germans. But he also never forgets the first time he laughed at an American film, the first time he questioned what he'd been taught, the first time he understood that freedom wasn't chaos, but possibility. Otto remains a true believer until the end. He's repatriated to Germany, where he spends years in Allied detention. He never accepts Germany's guilt, never acknowledges the Holocaust, never admits that the Nazi ideology was fundamentally evil. He dies in the 1970s, bitter and unrepentant, still convinced that Germany should have won, still believing that the Führer's vision was righteous. Two men, the same war, the same capture, the same camps, the same films, but two completely different outcomes. Because in the end, the movies weren't magic. They didn't brainwash anyone. They didn't force transformation. They simply provided information that had been denied. They showed reality that propaganda had obscured, and they gave prisoners the opportunity to make a choice about who they wanted to be. Some chose truth. Some chose comfortable lies. And that choice, repeated millions of times across Germany and the occupied territories, determined whether the Nazi ideology would survive or die. The American military understood something profound about human nature and political transformation. You can't force someone to change their beliefs. You can't beat ideology out of a person. But you can expose them to alternatives. You can show them what they've been denied. You can plant seeds of doubt and water them with truth and hope that something new grows. The POW camps in America were laboratories for this experiment, and by most measures, they succeeded. Thousands of German prisoners returned home with changed minds. They became advocates for democracy. They helped rebuild Germany as a free nation. They rejected the Nazi past and embraced a different future. Not all of them, obviously. Otto and his kind existed everywhere, but enough changed to make a difference. And it started with something as simple as a projector humming to life in a darkened room. Think about what that means.
The most destructive ideology of the 20th century, responsible for tens of millions of deaths, defeated in part by Hollywood musicals and cowboy films. Propaganda about American weakness and degeneracy shattered by images of abundance, freedom, and diversity. Years of Nazi indoctrination cracked open by the simple act of showing reality. This is one of the great untold stories of World War II. Not the battles and the heroes and the grand strategies, though those matter, but this quieter victory, this psychological warfare conducted not with weapons, but with culture. This transformation that happened one mind at a time, one film at a time, one moment of doubt at a time. The camps themselves are mostly gone now, torn down after the war, converted to other uses, forgotten by history. But their legacy remains. In the Germany that emerged from the ashes, in the prisoners who became citizens, in the proof that even the most toxic ideology can be defeated, not just militarily, but intellectually and morally. The Projector War was won not with bullets, but with light. And that light, shining in the darkness of a Texas theater or a Louisiana barracks or a Wisconsin camp, revealed something the Nazis desperately tried to hide. That human beings, given the choice between hatred and hope, between lies and truth, between death and life, will often choose the better path. Not always. Otto proves that. The violence in the camps prove that. The hardcore Nazis who never changed prove that. Transformation isn't guaranteed, but it's possible. And that possibility, that small crack in the armor of absolute certainty, is how revolutions begin. Not with grand gestures, but with whispered questions. Not with violence, but with laughter at an American joke. Not with force, but the slow recognition that everything you've been told might be wrong. Yohav's story is the story of thousands. Men who went to war for an evil cause, not because they were evil, but because they were lied to, manipulated, indoctrinated from childhood. Men who could have remained trapped in that ideology forever, but instead they were shown an alternative, and they chose it. That choice echoes through history. It reminds us that people aren't their ideologies, that minds can change, that exposure to truth, even uncomfortable truth, has power, that culture matters as much as politics, that stories shape reality, that light drives out darkness. In the end, the most powerful weapon America deployed in those POW camps wasn't kindness, though kindness mattered. It wasn't superior propaganda, though the films were effective. It was simply the truth about what America really was, flaws and all. The truth about what the Nazis really were, horrors and all. The truth about what freedom meant and what it cost and why it mattered. And in a darkened room, on a makeshift screen, with a projector clicking steadily through the reels, that truth became visible, undeniable, transformative. The ideology that promised to last 1,000 years couldn't survive exposure to reality, and that's the real lesson. Not that America was perfect, or that democracy is inevitable, or that good always triumphs, but that lies, no matter how sophisticated, eventually crumble when confronted with truth, that propaganda, no matter how pervasive, can't compete with lived experience, that even the most closed mind can be opened if you show it what it's been missing. The Projector War was fought without firing a shot, and it changed the course of history. One film at a time, one prisoner at a time, one moment of recognition at a time, until the darkness gave way to light and a new world became possible.